Step 2, A Greater Power, a presentation by Robert P. Hello, my name is Robert P. and I am a grateful member of Nar-Anon. However, I'm speaking as an individual and not as a representative of Nar-Anon. The topic for this presentation is Step 2. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. I'm going to tell my story in 4 parts. What was, what changed, more change, and carrying the message. What was it like? My family has a lot of alcoholics. My mother has even come to believe her mother was an addict. As for myself, I married a pill addict. Now, neither the pill addict nor I called her an addict, but I knew something wasn't right. So in desperation, I joined an Anon program. I got a sponsor and I worked my steps in that program. I worked hard because I thought the steps would help me save our marriage. I finished the steps and I dropped out. I worked the steps for the wrong reason. I wanted to change her. I didn't wait for the miracle. I didn't wait for my spiritual transformation. Nope, I didn't get the results I wanted, so I dropped out. We have a slogan, if nothing changes, nothing changes. I can testify to that. I wanted things to change, but I didn't know how to get results. I wasn't going to change. She wasn't going to change. So we divorced. Later, I met a nice lady. This was going to be different. This is going to be so much different. Well, she drank a little, but at least she wasn't an addict. I knew that right up until the night she called me from jail. But even after that, I still tried to deny. Eventually, the judge's words got through to me. I accepted the truth. My girlfriend was an addict. It wasn't her fault that I was dating an addict. Enabling is in my genes. Enabling is built into my behaviors. Do you see people standing on street corners holding up signs, asking for change? That's American slang for give me some coins. But that's not my way. No, if I stood on a street corner, my sign would say, I don't want to change. And if I stood there for more than 5 minutes, I know some nice person would come over and say, you look like a good enabler. Do you want to enable me? I finally realized that until I changed, nothing was going to change. I was just going to keep on repeating. That's when I joined Nar-Anon. I worked the steps a second time. This time I used the Nar-Anon yellow books. This time I had a sponsor who understood addiction. And this time I was gaining a different concept of my higher power. Step 2 says, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. I had learned that power was not me. The second time through, I came to believe my higher power can change me. My higher power can change her. My higher power might not change us both at the same time or in the same way. By the time I finished the steps the second time, I could recite them word for word. I felt like I'd nailed it this time. Fortunately, higher power wasn't done with me yet. There was a lot more change heading my way. The first time I worked the steps, I got mental knowledge, but no internal change. The second time, I changed my behaviors, but not my thinking. So when the Nar-Anon 36 came out, I worked the steps a third time. One of my biggest light bulb moments this third time was in Step 2. When I got to Step 2, my sponsor asked me to describe my higher power. That seemed easy enough. I've known my higher power for almost my entire life. But I struggled as I tried to describe what I knew. My sponsor let me struggle. He let me struggle until I could see for myself that I could not answer the question. Then he shared that he also struggles with Step 2. His definition of a power greater than ourselves keeps changing. It's always getting bigger. That gave me a tremendous insight. Step 2 points to a power greater than my understanding. I had been limiting my God. I was only letting my God use tools I had already worn out. For example, I had prayed for higher power to help my girlfriend find recovery in an NA meeting. So I took her there, and I sat in the meetings with her. I kept waiting for the lightning bolt to strike. I prayed for my higher power to send her to a better rehab, not like the one the court had sent her to. I even took classes to be an addiction counselor. But eventually, she told me she'd already been to 6 rehabs. Eventually, I understood she wasn't ready to change. I began to understand how I was limiting my higher power. I kept telling higher power which tools to use. If what I see is a nail, then I want a hammer. And if my hammer isn't working, then I want a bigger hammer. I want to fix everything I see that's wrong with everyone around me. The Japanese have a slogan for this. The nail that sticks out will get struck down. I liked the sound of that slogan as soon as I heard it. Slowly, however, I came to understand the slogan is about introspection and self-examination. It is helpful when taking your own inventory. When I have friction in dealing with people, I ask myself, am I the exception? Or am I pointing fingers and taking someone else's inventory? If I seriously want to take my own inventory, then our program has great tools. And I do really appreciate having the right tool for the job. I went through a life-changing experience with tools when I was young. I wanted to change the pedals on my bicycle. One came off easy and I changed it. The other seemed to be stuck. So I got a bigger wrench. Then I got an even bigger wrench. Finally, I ripped that pedal off the bicycle. I didn't understand left-handed threads and right-handed threads. You unscrew one pedal like you take the lid off a pickle jar. But to unscrew the other pedal, you turn it like you're putting the lid on the jar. I didn't need a bigger wrench. I needed to gently apply the wrench I already had in a different way. I had been turning the wrench the wrong direction. Sometimes I treat my higher power like a really big wrench. Or maybe I expect higher power to be like a giant hammer. Those are tools I understand. And I expect higher power to use the tools I've already tried and already broken to fix a problem I cannot solve. When I do that, I'm focusing on the wrong thing. The one to change is me. And I really hope higher power uses the smallest hammer possible to get my attention. It's not as much fun when higher power has to get out the really big hammer just to get my attention. As a result of these steps, I've changed. So what is it like now? Now I try to carry the message. I realize now I had many spiritual awakenings that I didn't see. I look back now and I see all the miracles. A friend describes my insight as looking in the rear view mirror. I generally fail to see change when it occurs. I often fail to see miracles which result from the power of step 2. Later, I look back and I see them in my rear view mirror. My sponsor helped me find the miracles I had missed. Now I try to do the same for my sponsees. The power greater than my understanding has been in my life even when I did not see. Now I know to look for my higher power in unexpected places. Sometimes it's like playing a game of hide and go seek with my higher power. I get on my phone and I call friends. I've learned that higher power often speaks through my friends. This happens because we share step 2 and believe in a power greater than ourselves. I go to meetings. I used to go to 3 or 4 meetings a week, but when you live 100 miles from the next city, that adds up to a lot of miles. Still, I always find higher power in Narnon meetings. Now I'm really grateful we have online meetings. It is really nice to just jump into a meeting. 7 days a week there are online meetings. And guess what? Higher power hangs out in those meetings. Now I try to help others find the power of the steps. I think the steps are like an onion. If I try slicing and dicing with a hammer, I get a lot of tears, but not much usable onion. But if I slowly peel the onion, one layer at a time, I preserve the flavor. It took me 3 tries to grasp the significance of step 2, but that's looking in the rearview mirror. The first time I worked the steps, I thought I worked them exhaustively. The second time I worked them, I knew I left no stone unturned. The third time, I kept tripping over the stones I had not seen before. I plan to work these steps again and again. There is no graduation ceremony. As you might have noticed, I like analogies. I find analogies help turn words into pictures. I've talked about tools like hammers and wrenches. I've mentioned my rearview mirror. Then I said the steps are like an onion. Another analogy I like is eggs. In the United States, eggs are sold in cartons. There's a dozen eggs in a carton. But I don't go to the store, buy a carton, pick my favorite, and throw the rest in the trash. No, I use the dozen, just like I use the dozen steps. You know, sometimes I get resentments. People who cut me off on the freeway, neighbors holding loud parties with big groups during quarantine. Sometimes I get resentments regarding people I encounter in Nar service. I cannot fix my thinking by only using step 2, but I can by applying all 12 steps at once. I'll give you an example. Step 1. I am powerless. My neighbor was arrested for possession and driving under the influence. Once he got released, he was angry. He decided to rant to me with all his excuses. I go back to the Boundaries and Consequences pamphlet. Physical, verbal, and mental abuse are never to be tolerated. I no longer put up with physical, verbal, or mental abuse. Not from my family, not from my addicted loved ones, not from people in Nar-Anon, and not from a neighbor who is just venting. I am powerless to fix my neighbor's problems. Accepting that means I do not need to put up with his foul language either. That is step 1. Step 2. Came to believe a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. My prior behavior was an endless struggle to fix everything. My neighbor told me the judge ordered him to go to NA meetings. He didn't want to go hang out with drug addicts. Being a world-class enabler, I offered to take him to a couple to get him started. I offered to introduce him to some of the wonderful people I know who have recovery. What was I thinking? This guy doesn't need to fix a problem he doesn't admit to having. Instead, I was creating a problem for myself where none existed. Sometimes the best thing I can do is just get out of the way. Step 2 means higher power has a plan. Step 3, made a decision. I made a decision to trust a power greater than myself. When my neighbor restarted his cycle of being up for 36 or 48 hours at a time, I did not try to intervene while he was high. I did, however, drop a few hints when I thought he might be cognizant. Step 4, made a fearless moral inventory. We have great slogans about all this. An expectation is a premeditated resentment. Holding a resentment is like taking poison, hoping the other person dies. Well, at least suffers as much as I imagine I am suffering. I have resentments about the noise my neighbor makes in the middle of the night. Do I have the power to do anything about it? No. Is it my responsibility to fix a problem he doesn't think he even has? No. His higher power is on standby, and that is not me. The chaos I feel is in my head. I cannot evict my neighbor, but I have the power to evict the unruly tenants of expectation and resentment. They're not paying rent for the space they occupy in my mind. I do not need to hold on to expectations nor resentments. Those are character defects I can toss aside. Step 5, admitted my character defects. The addicts in my family seldom cause me grief any longer. I've detached, divorced, separated, relocated, moved, and moved on. For the most part, I've also detached from my neighbor, but I still have plenty of reasons to work step 5. It's just that now it's my service sponsor who gets my phone calls. Step 6, became ready for the change. Now that is hard. I wish everyone would just admit I was right in the first place. But this brings me back to step 2. Do I really trust my higher power? Do I believe in the power of step 2? When I do, that gives me the courage to try step 6 and focus on changing the one I can, me. Step 7, humbly ask the God of my understanding to change me. I do, I keep repeating, and then I forget. I go back to repeating my old behaviors. Step 2 reminds me there is a power greater than my understanding. To work step 7, I need to get out of the way. Step 8, make another list. Who have I harmed? I've probably been rude to my neighbor. Do I still think I have the power to solve everyone's problems? Yes. And trying to lift the entire world really messes with my lower back. So along with everyone else, I add myself to my step 8 list. Then I go back and look at step 2 again. There is a power greater than myself. Step 9, made amends. First and foremost, I forgive myself. I cannot solve anything outside my hula hoop. You know, that imaginary boundary between what is me and what is not? I also try to amend my behaviors with my neighbor. I try to listen politely. I've learned to trust that the power greater than me will find answers for him. After all, isn't that what I already said in step 2? Step 10, keep trying every day. Step 11, try to improve my understanding of the power who is greater than my understanding. Step 12, I learn what I can, and then I try to share it with others. The 12 steps work together. If a crisis pops up, you can work all 12 in a matter of minutes, like we just did. We just went through the 12 steps regarding my resentments towards my neighbor in about 6 minutes. Working the steps, however, assumes you have some understanding of a higher power. I was fortunate. When I came into Nar-Anon, I already had an understanding of a power greater than ourselves. When I got to step 2, I found my understanding was too limited. I'm still working to expand my understanding. I've come to believe I cannot comprehend a power greater than ourselves. So I accept, even if I cannot comprehend. But what if God, higher power, or power greater than ourselves is not suitable? I have a friend who lost all faith in her God. Whatever higher power meant, it was less than God, which meant it was less than 0. So we had to start from 0. Step 2 requires you at least acknowledge there is something more than 0. Over time, we found an analogy that worked for her. We picked those high voltage power lines. You know, those giant-sized towers? Those massive towers that carry power from one end of the state to the other. They're too big and too dangerous to climb. They carry immense amounts of power. I could never carry that much power. Even if I had the biggest bucket I could lift or the world's largest ego, I still couldn't carry that much power. And those towers are everywhere. So she and I agreed she did not need to say God. But every time she saw one of those towers, she would say, higher power. For her, that worked. And for me, everything I was discussing with her was a message I needed to hear. I still stop and admire those giant towers. They go nowhere, and yet no matter where I go, they're there already. They do nothing we can see, yet there's very little we could do without them. We would not be sharing this communication right now without them. Those high voltage towers help me to remember a power greater than ourselves is everywhere. With that, I'm near the end. I shared what I can with you. Some will find value in what I shared. I trust the power greater than my understanding will dispense what is appropriate to those who need it or those who want it. I want to thank you for this opportunity to share. This was exactly the topic I needed for this time in my life. Thank you. I'll close now with the Serenity Prayer, using the One version. God, grant me the serenity to accept the people I cannot change, courage to change the one I can, and wisdom to know it's me.